What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, February 21st, 2017, and we have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. In the bottom half of this hour, we're actually going to have an in-studio guest, Jim Beardsley, longtime friend, supporter of the website, and he's out here visiting from Arizona, so he's going to sit in at the bottom of the show, and we're going to have chat about a few things then as well. Now then, as you know, there is this huge corporate media attack on Donald Trump for daring to suggest that Sweden was suffering under the consequences of this open borders policy all over Europe, and they tried to basically claim Trump had said there was a terror attack. Trump had been quoting somebody else saying that it felt like there was a sort of that kind of atmosphere conducive to it, and everyone's saying, "Oh, you're nonsense. Everything's just fine in Sweden. We love our migrants and everything." And even the Prime Minister of Sweden came on out to attack Donald Trump and saying, "Look, everything is just fine." And only a few hours later, riots broke out in a Stockholm suburb, fights with the police, looting of stores, setting cars on fire. And it's a huge embarrassment. Obviously, the corporate media was wrong and Donald Trump was right. This open borders across Europe and the U.S. is causing huge, huge amounts of problems. And apparently, last night's riot was in Rinkeby, and it is a heavy concentrated area of immigrants. And apparently there have been riots there before as well that were basically not being reported because we're trying to be politically correct and we're trying to support the New World Order and we're trying to do all this other stuff. So, let's see. Loot shops in Stockholm suburb. Now here's where it gets really weird because we have all these governments that are so on board with the New World Order and open borders, they're not taking care of their own people. Apparently, Swedish citizens have started to buy bulletproof vests in order to protect themselves from all this violence, and the Swedish parliament is now considering a ban on the sale of bulletproof vests to the Swedish people because, you know, it looks bad, and you guys shouldn't worry about protecting yourselves. We'll take care of you. And they haven't, really. Now, the last year that we have accurate figures for is 2015. Sweden accepted 162,000 refugees in 2015. Less than 500 actually have jobs. This is a heavy strain on the welfare systems of Sweden and all of Europe. And it is a major, major problem, and all of these European Union governments are still on board with George Soros and the New World Order and global government. No matter what harm it brings to their people, no sacrifice by other people is too great to bring about our dream of a global government. Harumph, harumph, harumph. Now then, stories coming out of the White House. According to InfoWars, apparently one of the major leakers from the Trump White House turns out to be Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus. And a lot of people were kind of wondering why Trump tapped him. And at the time I suggested that Trump is trying to mend fences with the GOP ahead of the 2020 elections. But it turns out that Trump brought a real political snake into his midst. And Priebus has now been outed as one of the major White House leakers who are taking these draft documents, incomplete documents, leaking them out to the media so the media can go on the attack. Another story coming on out from 12160. Apparently the White House suspects John McCain as being a media leaker, and they even suspect that Senator McCain eavesdropped on Donald Trump's classified phone. So Trump is definitely surrounded by enemies, and he's got to bring that hammer down right now. Now, Roger Stone is out there saying Priebus was behind the push to oust Flynn, and now he wants Miller and Bannon to go next. In other words, Priebus is trying to create a Priebus-only zone in the White House. That White House Chief of Staff is a very, very powerful position, but apparently it's not powerful enough. Basically, Priebus wants to control the Trump White House in order to control Donald Trump himself. Story coming out of PatriotRising.com. Apparently, a left-wing activist group has released an anti-Trump training manual. We're going to get the troops together, and we're going to teach them how to oppose the reforms to immigration and how to oppose the wall and oppose Donald Trump. Basically, they're encouraging people to break the law, is what they're doing. And here is kind of interesting. Down in San Diego, California, the Bishop of San Diego has attacked Donald Trump, and he's told his diocese, we must all become disruptors. He did this 20-minute address to the U.S. regional meeting of the World Meeting of Popular Movements. Bishop Robert McElroy said President Trump was the candidate of disruption. We must all become disruptors. Now, I'd like to remind the good bishop, after we pry him loose from the altar boys, that all churches that are tax exempt under a 501c3 are absolutely prohibited from directly or indirectly participating in any political activity. The bishop has just kissed off the Catholic Church's tax exempt status, not to mention that the bishop seems to have forgotten Romans 13, which says you are supposed to be subordinate to government authority. Little something the Romans added in there after the Council of Nicaea. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just now rejoining our network. By the way, you've been hearing about all these people boycott Ivanka Trump's products. If we can't get Donald, we're going after the family, which even the mafia doesn't do that. It's backfired. It's had the banned in Boston effect. They've made such a ruckus about various Trump products, everybody's starting to buy them. They're best sellers. It's had exactly the opposite effect of what they wanted. Okay, story out of 12160.info talking about the billionaire-owned corporate media is as worthless as ever. And basically says at this point, between the attacks on Donald Trump and the endless Russian conspiracy theories, there's nothing of any real value left in the newspapers and the network TV news. That's why they're losing their audience, why they're losing their advertisers, why they're having to cheat on the clicks on their websites. Julian Assange has come on out and said, when you read a newspaper article, you are reading weaponized text. And he's absolutely right. We've seen the spin doctoring on full display to try and steer the emotional content a certain way. Reddit is apparently ramping up censorship of conservatives. And to show you just how over-the-top the propaganda is, over at the Daily Mail in Great Britain, they had this headline story, is Putin the world's real richest man? After 17 years in power, Russian leader has a $200 billion fortune, 58 planes and helicopters, and 20 palaces and country retreats. And that's the headline they're hoping people will read and stop at that point. Oh, poor Bill Gates, he's really not the richest man on earth. That evil Vladimir Putin has made... But if you read the actual article, they're admitting in the article, it's all guesses. It's all estimates by people who are not in a position to know. They're admitting in the body of the article, it's all just a wild guess. They don't really know, but by golly, we're going to go with that headline because it makes Putin look bad, and that's our job here. Now, as you know, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations died rather suddenly, and already the American corporate media are saying, oh, this was Donald Trump's handler, his controller. He recruited Trump to the USSR. And by the way, the USSR is gone. But corporate media never lets accuracy or inaccuracy get in their way. I mean, they're out there doing that. This issue about the UN, the Russia's ambassador to the UN, caps the reality that in the last 2 months, 4 senior Russian diplomats have died suddenly. And what we're getting in the corporate media is, oh, it's just a coincidence. It really, they were on death's door. They had horrible health. That's not true. They were all healthy. Nobody expected them to have these deaths. Now, apparently, the UN Security Council wanted to adopt a statement on the death of Ambassador Churkin. And the Ukraine went in and kicked up a huge fuss saying, no, we're not going to honor anybody from Russia. And frankly, by kicking up that fuss, in my mind, Ukraine just made itself the prime suspect in the recent series of assassinations of senior Russian diplomats. Methinks the junta doth protest way, way too much. Now, a little bit of good news. With Trump in the White House, the CIA assistance to Obama's moderate rebels in Syria has come to a screeching halt. The money and supplies have been cut off. Obama and his cohorts are really angry and up in arms because now they're being cut out of the CIA loop. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Obama, you are a private citizen. You are not cleared to be involved in CIA covert operations. Didn't get the message his term expired? Anyway, speaking of Syria, apparently the Syrian Air Force has purged ISIS-linked terrorists in Idlib, just cleaned them all out, and apparently they killed 30 militants and 16 units of military equipment, including battle tanks. This thing is going to be over very, very soon before the U.S. can get its boots on the ground in there. Now, do you remember Representative Alcee Hastings? Used to be Dove, war's bad, war's bad, war's bad. He's done a 180, and he's now sponsoring a bill to authorize President Trump to attack Iran. This is another one of these authorizations for the use of force, like they used to give Bush a license to start war with Iraq, only this one is with Iran. Because everybody's all hot and bothered to attack Iran, especially Israel, as long as somebody else is paying for it and other people's children are dying in it. They want Iran smashed. Story from offguardian.org. Now, offguardian.org is a media website that is set up to basically call out the propaganda in The Guardian. And it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. And they've got an article basically showing how the propaganda has evolved during that whole Libyan situation, going back to when Muammar Gaddafi established a state bank, took control of Libya's public currency to handle it like a public utility, came up with the gold dinar, and all the propaganda that was used to convince everybody that it was a good idea to kill Gaddafi, end the public bank, reimpose private central banking, and how all the labels were just changing. The spin cycle's fully on display. And this gets back to an observation I've made many, many times. For propaganda to work, it must present a believable, coherent alternative reality that makes sense in order to insert it between the viewer and the real world. The biggest failing of the American political establishment, and for that matter George Soros, is they have contracted the propaganda campaign to advertising agencies and public relations firms, which institutionally do not maintain a long view. Everything is handled as a discrete little universe and a problem to solve. An ad campaign for a couple of weeks, couple of months, that's it. It's over and done with. The slate is wiped clean, and now they're on to the next task. And that is why so much of the propaganda continues to contradict itself. They're living in a world in which they assume that you will listen to what you are being told today and you have already forgotten what you were told last week. And that's not real. And that's why it doesn't really make a lot of sense. We're going to take a phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, what's USSR stand for, real quick?
Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
You got it. Hey, Mike, even if, we cut them off, it's too late because you got the Britain, France, Germany, all of them are arming Saudi Arabia, right?
Yes.
So there you go. The weapons are still going to be flowing to ISIS. Yeah. Didn't we give them $25 billion?
I don't
that
know.
Was half of the $50 billion.
I don't know how much we actually gave them, but it's been a lot, and we may never know how much was actually diverted. I mean, look around at our country. The wealth of the American people, the wealth of our nation has been strip-mined away to pay for all of these wars. And we're certainly not getting value for money there. But I have absolutely no doubt that elements within CIA that think they should be running the war instead of the president are probably still working on ways to get money and supplies to ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. But there is no question that the volume of material has been seriously cut back.
But the problem with the ISIS and the Wahhabist moderate rebels is the more they get killed, the quicker they're going to have to put new recruits in the field, and it's going to be harder for them to train with those kind of weapons. They'll be killing themselves with the mortars and stuff.
Well, you need to remember that a lot of those people in the so-called moderate rebels are not even real fanatics. They're hired mercenaries. 95% of the Free Syria Army are not even from Syria. And so if the paychecks stop, you're going to see most of those people just leave.
And then they should all be helicoptered. Yeah, I wouldn't let them leave.
Well,
if they have the opportunity.
they'll probably accept Assad's offer of an amnesty and a pardon, which was a very smart thing for Assad to do. A lot of these moderate rebels have already accepted it. They put down their guns. They've gone back to their homes, and they're just going to put this all out of their mind. That's the smart thing to do. Is not give the opposition any kind of an issue that can be used to try and continue the motivation. The greatest enemy of any military is a lack of enthusiasm about what they're doing. And if you take away the perception that the enemy is this real bad enemy, the enthusiasm starts to drop. A good example, World War II, both sides were telling their soldiers, oh, the other side's going to torture and kill you and everything. And then when some prisoners actually got caught and they were treated humanely because the Red Cross was keeping an eye on it, and they were saying, you guys aren't anywhere near as bad as we were told. But yeah, you're told that the other side is evil to get you to kill them.
Hey, Mike, did you hear anything about in Obama's last days he made a weapons deal with Kenya?
I heard something about it, but it sounded kind of fishy to me.
Yeah, it's very odd. I don't see Kenya as important as as Saudi Arabia or something. But hey, Mike,
how's the volume?
I know one of your callers the other day or yesterday mentioned how Pence went to the European Union, and I don't know if he mentioned this, but they added one star to the U.S. flag. In solidarity, it's like the EU would be the 51st state, like some.
I don't think the member states of the European Union are very happy about that. They're trying to oppose the federalization plan coming out of Brussels right now.
One state to drag everybody else down. I thought California is bad. Man, the EU is dragging the whole world down.
Well, no, private central banking is dragging the world down. That 11th marble is dragging the world down. And that 11th marble has been orbiting out there in space and growing and growing and growing, and now it's about the size of the asteroid that wiped out all the dinosaurs, and it's headed back to Earth right now.
And would you say that at this point, we are a Rome welfare and a warfare state, but pretty much the majority of us exporting is weapons. The whole Western world, right? Pretty much the big countries, France, Germany, Britain.
Yeah, it's big business, but oddly enough, following the demonstrations in Syria, more and more purchasers of weapons are turning to Russia and China. Certainly looking at America's latest generation of weapons, they're hideously expensive. They don't work very well. They're very expensive to maintain or repair. And again, war is based on economics. The first side to run out of money loses. Okay, we got to take a break here.
They don't break down in the Panama Canal.
Yeah, that's right. Dustin, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to talk about the economic news now. Russia is back in the gold buying business. They bought 1 million ounces in January. That's 37 metric tons of gold bullion, because they know when all this paper imaginary currency starts to fall apart, hard assets are going to be ruling the world again. And Russia has tremendous advantage in gold ownership, and it may even be more advantageous than anybody is realizing, because there are still questions circulating about just how much gold is really in those Western central banks. Remember when Germany wanted their gold back and the New York Fed went ballistic and the Bank of France went ballistic, and then they invaded Mali, which is Africa's third largest gold producer. And we talked about this a lot on that TV show on the History Channel, America's Book of Secrets, The Gold Conspiracy, about how these central banks have been leasing the gold out. They've been trying to make a profit off of other people's gold, because it's not like a savings account where you put in your money and the bank is allowed to loan it back out and earn it. These bullion depositories are like safety deposit boxes in which you're paying a fee, or sometimes they do it as a courtesy, but you put your property in that vault and it is left there. And when you ask for it back, you get back exactly the same thing that you put in there. Now, that did not work out for Germany, because when Germany started asking for their gold back, what they got back at first were different bars of gold that did not have the hallmarks of Germany, Bundesbank, and as it turned out, analysis showed it wasn't even as pure as the gold that had been sent in to the New York Federal Reserve. So if, in fact, the gold is really gone, remember all those tungsten core gold bars that were found with the hallmarks of Fort Knox and the New York Fed? If the gold is really gone someplace else and the paper currency collapses, the U.S. financial system has got nothing on which to build a new economy. Because nobody's going to want to go back to this imaginary money that just is created out of thin air and loaned at interest. Everybody understands that is why the United States and Europe are always living in perpetual debt, and perpetual debt slavery. Now, housing affordability is showing most Americans are too broke to buy a home. The so-called American dream is moving out of reach of ordinary Americans. Part of the problem is because of our debt-based society. Young couples, even at the point where their parents and grandparents would have considered buying a home, today young people are saddled with debt, much of it student loan debt, which has turned into another banker scam, because these kids are not getting an education at college. They're being indoctrinated to the liberal agenda, and they graduate college with some degree in women's studies or white privilege studies or art history or something like that, and they can't find a job with which to pay those student loans back. They have been scammed, and they don't realize it. Now, we're hearing that retail sales came in better than expected for January, but it may not have really been enough. Toys R Us is quietly laying off hundreds. They're now $850 million in debt. And Nordstrom's has just reported its fifth straight quarter of declines. They're in trouble. Keep hearing words about Sears may vanish soon. Macy's has lost profits. Profits fell 13%, and they're announcing 34 more stores will be closing. CSX Railway has announced 1,000 management-level layoffs. HSBC has announced an ugly bottom line. Profits fall 62%. This Ponzi scheme, this pyramid called private central banking, is coming apart. Because just by the way it's designed, private central banks can't perpetuate. They reach a point where they collapse and take their societies down with them, and we're there. Right now we're dealing with the biggest gasoline glut in 27 years. That's driving oil stock prices lower and lower. We're going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, we're going to be talking with Jim Beardsley. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And joining us in our studio today is Jim Beardsley, who's been a supporter and friend of the What Really Happened website, going back, I think, 11 or 12 years since we first connected over topics about, well, all sorts of things. And by way of leading him in to the discussion here, there's a story coming out of Canada regarding Arthur Topham, who was convicted of inciting hatred against the Jews or promoting hatred against Jews. And all he did was basically point out some of the historical inaccuracies and inconsistencies in the official story of the Holocaust. But unfortunately, under Canadian law, questioning the Holocaust is punishable by law. Arthur tried to file a constitutional challenge saying that his website merely collected together information from other sources that was available, and the judge unfortunately has turned him down. And Canada is one of these countries where merely asking a question about an historical event can get you thrown in jail. So, Jim, obviously you've been following this kind of story for a very, very long time, and what's your reaction?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Mike, for letting me join you here in the studio and the listening audience. This is nothing new in Canada. It goes way back to 1981 with Ernst Sundel, who had 2 trials there. By the way, in one of those trials, the judge ruled that truth was no defense. And Doug Christie, the attorney, defended him in both of his trials, and Mark Lemire and Paul Fromm have also tried to get some freedom of speech in Canada, but it's just not there.
No, it isn't. And the important thing to point out here is when you see the intense legal political effort that is constantly focused on this issue, it becomes very apparent some great secret is being hidden. Because, let's face it, if you go around saying that Elvis is still alive, you're not going to get thrown in jail. People will laugh at you. If you say that you saw the Bigfoot, they'll chuckle, but your career isn't destroyed. If you claim that you got a ride in a flying saucer, nothing happens. People just look at you and say, all right, that's it. But you question this one incident in history and just look at the huge political, legal forces that are brought to bear to get you to conform with the dogma that is being put out about this. It's very obvious from all of this intense effort that some great secret is being hidden. Because if the Holocaust had happened as described and people wanted to ask questions about it, nobody would really care one way or the other. Just as they wouldn't care about people who claim to have seen Elvis is still alive, or Michael Jackson is still alive, or Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. And it's simply ignored. But when you look at this idea, as Jim was saying, in one of Ernst Zundel's trials, the judge literally said, even if everything you say is absolutely true, it's still illegal to say it. And, I mean, this kind of jurisprudence, if you will, is right out of the Dark Ages, where you are punished for not believing as you're told to believe.
Well, the important thing here, Mike, is you mentioned as described. It's not that people deny the Holocaust. It's the fact that they are questioning certain aspects of it. In fact, I believe in 1982, at the Auschwitz prison camp, there were 19 plaques in 19 different languages that said 4 million people died there. That's been changed to 1.1. That's an error of 75%. So the Holocaust supporters actually changed that themselves. And this type of thing is what the people are against. They're not saying they deny the Holocaust. They're saying they're denying the story as presented.
Yeah, they're pointing out the inconsistencies, and now, of course, we've documented that Israel's, or the people who wanted to found Israel, were using that 6 million number even during World War I, because it comes out of some of their religious beliefs, and it's not really grounded in reality. Certainly when I was in Germany and I got to visit some of the camps, they were very straightforward in saying they were slave labor camps. These prisoners were of value to the Nazis in order to make the material for the German army. And actually, if you look at some of the facilities at Auschwitz, they were actually taken fairly good care of certainly better care than you find even in some American prisons today. Most people don't realize it. They had theaters. They had internal camp script where they could buy things from the camp store. They had orchestras. They had swimming pools. They were kept in very good shape because healthy people are better workers. And, of course, as the war came to an end, the German army brought back typhus from their failed attempt to conquer Moscow. It swept across Germany, and millions died, not just the inmates, but even the guards, the camp guards, people in the cities were dying. And that is really where much of the deaths associated with the camps came from, was typhus.
Well, you're talking about freedom of speech, Mike.
Yes.
And quite frankly, Israel is very much against freedom of speech. One big example of that is Mordecai Vanunu, who exposed that Israel had nuclear weapons way back when, and he's been in just prison ever since. They let him out for a few months, and then he does something and they don't like, and he goes back to prison again.
Well, Israel is still trying to pretend that they don't really have nuclear weapons. It's one of the world's worst kept secrets. We know they have hundreds of nuclear warheads. Documents that surfaced after the fall of the former government of South Africa revealed Israel is selling clandestine nuclear weapons to other countries. And that's why they won't sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They're using the NNPT to basically create a monopoly for nuclear weapons. They're the only country selling these clandestine nuclear weapons, and they can charge whatever they want.
Now we're getting home with this thing, because any country that has nuclear weapons that is not a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, it is against the law to aid them in any way.
Yes.
And we are aiding them all the time. That's pocketbooks that are American-made.
Well, that's why the U.S. government still goes along with this issue of nuclear ambiguity. I remember all the way back 8 years ago, Barack Obama's first news conference as president, and he was asked point blank by Helen Thomas, what nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons today? And Obama put on his tap shoes and he tap danced away from it, and the next day she was kicked off the press corps, because it is a violation under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act for the U.S. government to give any kind of aid to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the NNPT or allow IAEA inspections. And again, it's another example of there's one set of rules for Israel and there's another set of rules for everybody else.
That's the way it is. You're telling that straight.
Okay, well, we're coming up here on the end of our slot here. I know you got to head on off and take care of some other things. So we got about 2 minutes. What do you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I just wanted to mention the USS Liberty again. It was attacked by Israel, 171 wounded, 34 dead. And we still have not been able to bring that to the light of day. The most recent investigation, which is quite a while ago, was conducted by Admiral Thomas Moore, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Rear Admiral Starlin was on the committee, and General Block from the Marines was. And their conclusion was that the attack on the USS Liberty was deliberate, and second of all, that it was covered up by the United States government. And that hurts me very deeply as a veteran. I'll tell you that. Yeah, well, of course, the cover-up involved Admiral John McCain, Senator John McCain's father, and it went all the way up to LBJ himself. And, of course, Israel's goal was to sink the ship and frame Egypt for it to trick the United States into attacking Egypt. And in point of fact, there was a nuclear-armed strike in the air on its way to Cairo when the crew of the Liberty were finally able to reestablish radio communications and say, these are Israelis attacking us. I know quite a few of the survivors from the Liberty, and they're not giving up. They're still trying to get justice done. Well, we've had quite a few of them on the show here, and this history of false flags by Israel to trick other people into fighting their wars for them is an important point, because there are indications Israel was involved in 9/11, and certainly Israel is trying to find some way to get everybody to attack Iran now. And I think Israel, probably on the national level, Israel is the biggest single threat
to global peace of any country. Yes, the United States is the more aggressive in the open right now, but in that clandestine world of triggering wars, psychiatrists call it playing let's you and him fight. Israel definitely is the root cause of so much violence and suffering in the world.
I'd just like to point out that that's a long history with the Lavon affair way back when, where they tried to blame it on the Arabs to get the Americans on their side.
Oh, even before that, the bombing of the King David Hotel was carried out by Israeli agents dressed in Arab clothing. Anyway, listen, we're going to have to take a phone call. I'm going to turn your microphone down so you can leave whenever you feel like it. And we're going to talk to Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Hello, Mike.
Hi.
Hello, Mike. You had mentioned the riots in Sweden earlier, and I don't know if you've covered this already or not, but I've seen recently there's a video on the Internet now, it's easily found, of an Australian 60 Minutes crew being attacked on the ground in the street in Sweden. They were on the street doing a puff piece to show how darling our immigrant friends are, and after the police and the locals kind of walked away, the immigrants immediately attacked the Australian 60 Minutes TV video crew, and it's all taped.
Yeah, that happened a little while ago. Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, I've seen it.
I myself just came across it yesterday, yeah. But, I mean, they're not even smart enough to refrain from attacking the people who are shilling for them. That's just amazing. Sorry, I'm a day late and a dollar short.
Well, no worry about it. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to the economic news here. Let me clear my screen. With the control room. We were talking about the economic news. Russia's buying gold like crazy. Questions still remain about whether there's still gold to cover all of the outstanding obligations, both at Fort Knox, the New York Federal Reserve, Bank of England, Bank of France. There may, in fact, be a massive gold short somewhere. And when those paper contracts are being printed up to keep the price of gold down, so that people will not empty those negative interest rate savings accounts or empty their stock portfolios and get into metals as a form of wealth preservation. But they've leveraged those gold contracts literally hundreds to one, which means for every 1 ounce of physical deliverable gold, there are contracts promising hundreds of ounces. And obviously they cannot all be delivered on. It's simply not possible. And at some point there will be a gold run. And that's why when we tell everybody that you should have some gold and silver to preserve your wealth, we tell you get the physical metal, have it under your own direct control, because when there's a run on gold, those paper contracts are not going to be worth the paper they're printed on. All right, let's take a phone call here. Fran in Washington State. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha nui nui, Michael.
Aloha nui nui.
Say, we're a little off topic at this point, but I wanted to bring up, and I've been wanting to bring this up for a while, there should be a law. This is about housing prices.
Yes.
There should be a law against house flipping. It is the worst thing. You know, they turn around, flip it, and make the price higher. Somebody else turns around and flips it, makes the price higher. And it's all bullshit.
Got to watch your language on this radio. Got to watch your language on the radio. But you are, in essence, correct. And obviously, if somebody buys a property and puts in improvements and redoes the interior and replaces it, you know, then it's reasonable for them to turn around and sell the property again at a higher price. But you're right. Certainly during the run-up to the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008, we were seeing people that were buying a house in the morning and selling it that afternoon at a huge markup. In fact, there was even a different term for it. It wasn't called flipping. It was called frothing. And there was talk in the aftermath of the 2008 meltdown about having a law saying that if you bought a house, you had to own it for a certain minimum period of time that would be consistent with actually going on in and doing some improvements on it. But it didn't go anywhere. And yes, it's still a way of running up the price of a house, and sometimes it's just for the fast profit. In others, it's setting the stage for a massive fraud, because back in Arkansas in the 1980s, during that whole CIA Operation Screwworm, one of the ways that they would defraud the savings and loans is they would take a piece of property and flip it back and forth between some co-opted realtors so that its asking price was sky high. Then it would be pledged as collateral for a loan that was never repaid. The loan defaulted. The bank went to get the land and discovered it wasn't really worth what they'd been told, and that's why the S&Ls got in trouble.
Oh, okay, well, thanks, Mike.
All right, you got it. We're going to let you go here. Yeah, there's way too much game playing in our economic system. We seem to have gotten away from the idea that you make money by providing a service or producing a product that people want to buy, and now everybody who gets into the financial system, they want to game the system. They want to find ways to cheat it. And we live in a country in which the cheaters on Wall Street are not only not arrested for their crimes, the taxpayers get looted to cover the losses from what they're doing. We need to go the way Iceland did, Spain did, Iran did, China did. Crooked bankers ought to go to jail, or in the case of Iran, be beheaded. All right, let's take another phone call. Ralph in New York, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Mike, how you doing? Well, ask you a question. What's going to be the outlet concerning the wealthy living outside the United States, concerning places like Dubai and Qatar and Abu Dhabi and Monte Carlo? Now that Trump's in office, what do you think the outcome will be? Will the wealthy and the very super rich are living outside those countries will think about coming back to the States, or they will not take a chance like Obama was, or the past predecessor president? What's your opinion on this?
Well, whether or not they're going to repatriate their money or not is going to be very much dominated by the tax rates that are being imposed by both our country and the country where the money is being parked. And a lot of countries deliberately have very low tax rates. Some of them are even delineated for foreigners. So if you're a foreigner, you get a tax break if you park your money here and allow us to use it. And it is a complicated formula. But one of the problems we have here in the United States is that we pay sky-high taxes, but we don't get a whole heck of a lot back for it. And I'm certain that a businessman who's looking at where he's going to have his money parked and where it's going to be working, it's not just the tax rates, but will the infrastructure support the commerce that they are engaged in? And right now the answer is no. Ralph, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the economic news here, and apparently there are some areas where these anti-Russian sanctions are simply not being applied because major Russian car producer AvtoVAZ is now selling their new Lada Vesta model in Germany. And they're starting to ship them. They've shipped 200 of them. And apparently they're very popular and much sought after. It's a low-cost car, economy car. And as the Germans struggle with the ever-increasing tax burden to prop up the rest of Europe, cheaper cars look very, very attractive. All right, we're going to take a phone call. James in Tokyo. Hajime Mashite, what's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I need some advice. I think I'm becoming a buttercup because I see that piece of metal hanging on your wall, that symbol of violence that has caused many of your buttercup listeners to have a psychotic episode like me and seek a safe space for cookies and milk and a temple massage.
Yes.
But everybody except you seems to know that these evil weapons kill people, and people don't kill people. Moreover, looking at that sword, I can tell that it's from the Middle Ages, and it's the type used in the Crusades, which makes me believe that you're an Islamic.
Wrong.
I'm afraid that a racist who is traveling against those cute and cuddly refugees in Sweden.
Oh, James.
Yes?
Oh, James. The sword is from the movie Conan the Barbarian, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that particular one you couldn't kill anybody with because it's just a wall decoration, and if you tried to swing it around, the handle will come off. But I have it as a memento because I actually did some work on that Conan episode, and so I got that.
That could be fake news, and it makes me seem that you're against these packs of 10 cute and cuddly refugees who like to have have reciprocal sex with one Swedish woman, and you don't understand their feelings. And, when they have these urges, and Michael, I got to tell you, like, the Swedish leftist government has done numerous studies that shows when 10 of these refugees rape one woman, that 10 out of 11 people enjoy the experience.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the joke. I always like to do a little joke, but I want to talk to you about my take on the Muslims.
It has to be real quick. We're coming up on station break.
Can I do that after the station break?
All right, we're going to hold you over the station break here, but
sure.
Started now, and then we'll take you through the station break.
Okay, yeah. My boy went to L.A. for an action film, and I showed him some TV. And in America, you put on the TV news, and there's always showing stuff about violence and this and that, and I'm showing him just to be careful.
All right, we're going to put you on hold here. Got to do the station break. I'll come back to you after this. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking with James in Tokyo, and you were telling us that your son was headed back to the U.S. To work on a film project of some kind, and you were indoctrinating him into the news about violence in the streets of America.
Yeah, I did that, and he accepted it, and he went there, and he came back okay. But when I went from the difference in the news from L.A. and the difference from the news in Mumbai, India, where I had to go like twice last year, where it's basically a Hindu, Muslim, and Tamil society, it's totally different. So if you put on the news in L.A., it's like these people were, carjacked and drug dealings, they were shot and cops were killed. When you go to India, it's totally different. You have the people don't integrate. The Muslims and the Hindus, you even have separate blocks and separate neighborhoods. They can't even, one person can't even walk in a different person's neighborhood. And the news there, which I would see on TV and more from even the papers that they give by my hotel room, you see crazy stuff. It's like all from the Muslims. Like one dry cleaner didn't close the store like 5 minutes late during pray time, and like 5 people hanged him. Or one person talked to a Hindu cab driver, and the uncle, raped her with 20 relatives and burned her alive. It's a totally different society. I mean, I would walk on the streets, but even though I think the Muslims were more crazy, I actually felt even more safe walking in their neighborhoods because I don't know. I can't even explain it. One guy tried to hit me over the head with a 2x4, and I knocked him out. I have 35 years of martial arts experience, and I didn't even think that was a hate crime. It was like more like he just wanted money. But it's just so crazy over there. Like all the crimes are related to Islam that you read.
Well, economics drives a lot of it too. Have you ever seen the film Slumdog Millionaire?
No, I haven't. But it's a
pretty accurate depiction of what life is like for most of the people of India.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just something. That's all. That's all I have to say today. And you have a great day, Mike, and you have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Rob in Chicago. Aloha, Rob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I wanted to talk to you about the lady's comment over, she was talking about people flipping houses and how they were overvaluing them, and that's, I got involved with flipping houses to try and save my investments after everything collapsed in 2008. The houses that I actually had invested in a lure of a normal market, and subsequently, ruined me. Mm-hmm. But I still had enough ability, assets, and credit to go off and go after some of these houses to buy them I bought them at market value. I paid market price for them. They were extraordinarily less than what they were owned for, but the thing that I will pass on to that lady is 90% of the houses that I would go into, well, I would say every one of them that I went into, because I was looking at lower dollars so that I could turn a profit by working on them, sweat equity, refurbishing them, making them nice again. And quite honestly, every one of my houses, when I was done with it, was the nicest one on the market at a value price. I made it the nicest house for the least amount I could make it, sell it, to make a good profit for working on it. But
that's legitimate. That is legitimate, and we made a point of setting aside that idea of somebody acquiring a property and improving it and selling it at a profit, as opposed to the frothers who are just buying a house and then selling it literally that same day and saying the asking price is now more.
Right. What they did now, though, my friend was doing the flipping, and the banks actually held the properties away from them so that they could sell them to these block investing corps that were buying thousands of houses at a time. But the strange thing about all of this, though, Mike, that really bothers me is how much talk actually came out of now. Every one of my investment properties was a 90% loan, meaning I had to pay PMI. That was private mortgage insurance. Now, nobody is explaining to me how when the collapse came and all of those banks that sold all of those bad mortgages, how they could default on them because they all had mortgage insurance on them. So they literally were double dipping.
Okay.
Were they not?
If they did have, well...
If I defaulted on a property, I did default on a property. So I lost it. The bank who owned the mortgage, technically, they would be reimbursed by that policy. And I believe AIG was one of them that was actually, they got taken under because of that.
Well,
but again,
between that and the derivatives.
You're a very smart
yes.
man, and you don't know that much about it. So that really bothered me, that nobody was discussing this. But these banks, they got paid off by the government, and they got the insurance money. Or how much, So, interesting, though.
Well, that's something I hadn't considered before. I know that when you get a mortgage, getting mortgage insurance is a way of protecting the bank. My understanding is that mortgage insurance would pay the outstanding balance on the mortgage. But I don't know that the mortgage insurance pays off if the bank repossesses. And perhaps we need to pay a little bit more attention to that. But I think there's one thing we can all agree on, which is that the system is very much rigged to the benefit of the bankers and to the detriment of the ordinary people of the United States. Anyway, Rob, we're going to let you go here. We've got to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And we're going to switch over to Byron in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, I'm just calling in regards to the second caller back, where he was talking about crazy Muslims. It's quite amazing how, it just came out now that Edward Heath, the former Prime Minister of Britain, probably had about 30 or 40 cases of pedophilia charges that's been coming up against him. I don't know if he's dead, but they released it that he was...
Well, dig him up and throw him in prison.
Yeah, well, whatever. The thing is, nobody's saying, well, it was a Christian guy that was molesting all these kids. You have Jeffrey, what was his name?
Epstein.
Steinberg, or whatever his name is, the guy that had the island there where he's taking guys there and having young girls there.
Yep.
Nobody's saying, well, this Jewish guy over there was having these little girls molested. It's always the Muslims. And then most of the stories about the Muslims happen to be made up, like the rapes in Germany over Christmas were over 1,000. Well, they came out and said it was a bunch of crap. Sweden, the same thing. I see.
Well, wait a minute. Okay, first of all, the crimes are taking place, and there may be some exaggeration, but you need to understand that the governments of these European countries are literally issuing orders to their media not to report on the ethnicity of the people committing these crimes, because all of this backflash from the refugee crisis is a serious threat to the global government New World Order. And so the reality is that a lot of this is being hidden or it's being denied, and anytime you see somebody saying, oh, it's all an exaggeration, you need to follow that individual or that source back to their funding, because in a lot of cases you'll find out George Soros's non-governmental organizations are out there trying to create a media myth that this concern over violence by the refugees is totally overblown.
Well, the thing is, I'm not saying one way or the other, because I see so many stories on your website, and normally they're the same stories just repeated over and over again. But here's the way I look at it, Mike. United States, Britain, and France went over there and started this whole thing. Well, they started in Iraq, but their last one, this thing in Libya, attacked Libya and absolutely destroyed it by these Christian people. Mm-hmm. Destroyed it. Libya did nothing to the United States.
Oh, yes, it did. Yes, it did.
Huh?
Libya decided to sell their oil for a currency other than the U.S. dollar, and that is a major threat to our banking system. Now, I'm not in agreement that the U.S. Had any kind of a right to go into Libya, but from the point of view of the U.S. government and Wall Street, yeah, Gaddafi did do something that was perceived as a tremendous threat. So did Saddam Hussein when he got the UN's permission to sell Iraq's oil for the euro instead of the dollar.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, as far as I'm concerned, Mike, United States, Britain, and France started this whole thing. These refugees, maybe these young kids are suffering from post-trauma distress disorder or whatever, like the soldiers do. Maybe that's what it is. After being bombed for 6 years, maybe there's a bunch of crazy refugees now. But as far as I'm concerned, all these refugees ought to be taken to France, United States, and Britain, not to Germany. Germany, I don't even know why they're taking them. I don't even know why Canada's even taking them. We've never done anything to go over there and start the problem. But they ought to bring the refugees over, kick out the Americans out of their home, and put them in their homes and let them go live in tents, the Americans. They're the ones that caused all the trouble. That would solve a lot of problems if the Americans had
Byron, okay.
Yeah.
The American people, for the most part, were not in agreement with what the U.S. government was doing. Now, if you want to kick those politicians out of their homes and put the refugees in there, I'm fully on board with that. But you're continuing a pattern of allowing one small group of people to commit an atrocity or a crime and then spreading the punishment over the general population that had very little say about it. I think all these refugees ought to be allowed to go back home, and we need to stop all these wars that made them refugees in the first place, and that is our best solution. Because
I agree.
Okay.
Absolutely. They need to go back home because, they're just going to empty out their countries, which Israel is really liking for their plan for a greater Israel, to empty it out. But the thing is, United States, Britain, and France, they've got to be made to pay reparations to these countries for what they've done. That's all I got to say. And until it hits them in their back pocket, unfortunately, like you said, the average Joe's one that's going to get hit. But it should be the ones that are selling the arms, manufacturing arms. They ought to go directly right to them and take the money right out of their back pockets to pay for the damage that the United States has done in these countries.
I agree. All right, Byron, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. But again, we're seeing in so many different areas of activity where a small group of people will do something wrong, whether it's a war, invasion, assassination, the mortgage-backed security fraud, and because we live in a fascist economic dictatorship, the ordinary people are punished for the actions of the privileged few, even in cases where we didn't agree with what they were doing. Most Americans have certainly been opposed to all of these wars. Most Americans were certainly opposed to Wall Street committing fraud, and we're wondering why we're not seeing any prosecutions for fraud. But if the financial system and the government are committing these crimes and they're not interested in our permission or not listening to us, we're not responsible either. Now, as far as the problems caused by the refugee crisis, we need to get back to that idea that migration is a filtering process. We're not getting the best representatives of those source countries. We're not getting the best Syrians, the best Libyans, the best whoever is coming on in. We're getting people who couldn't make it in their own country. Same thing with coming across the border from Mexico. We're getting people who weren't successful in their home country, and they think coming here is going to automatically make them successful. In many cases, we have criminals who are fleeing prosecution in their home countries, and they're coming in without a medical check whatsoever. This is all downside for everybody except the New World Order folks who go to bed at night dreaming of a single gleaming golden throne of planet Earth, with the seat of it being polished by their particular derriere. And that's it. They're oblivious to the harm being caused by their dreams of glory and wealth and power and grandeur. Now, we're going to close the phone lines for a little bit because I'm falling behind on my news stories. We'll open up again probably in hour number 3. Getting on back to France, there is another media blackout going on over there because there are riots all over Paris. Do you know that Paris has been under martial law for almost 2 years? And now that they're coming up on the election, and it looks like Marine Le Pen is probably going to win, the left just can't hide what's going on with these riots, rapes, and murders from all of these refugees. And people are now starting to say, where the heck is BBC, ITV, Sky, not to mention the American corporate media, because they're all on board with George Soros' dream of a global government, and they are absolutely dedicated to the idea that you will not be told just the violence and crime that is resulting from just banging these two civilizations together. Now, Marine Le Pen has scored some major points because there was supposed to be a meeting between Marine Le Pen and Lebanon's Grand Mufti, but Lebanon's Grand Mufti said that Marine Le Pen would have to wear an Islamic veil to be in his presence, and Marine Le Pen said, okay, we're canceling. And that scored a lot of points here. Now, Angela Merkel is still out there with this thing saying Europe must take more migrants. Islam is not the cause of terrorism. Europe can't take more migrants. Their welfare system is already straining to the point of breaking. And we may not say that Islam is the cause of terrorism, but obviously the refugee flood has brought terrorism with it for whatever reason. Certainly we do see this attitude among many of the refugees that their new host country should be transformed to be just like the country they were running away from, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but that seems to be what's going on. Now, Angela Merkel's government is caught in yet another kerfuffle because one of her ministers, Barbara Hendricks, came on out and said meat is damaging to the environment and has declared only vegetarian food should be served at official events. And, of course, others are saying it's nanny statism and trying to force vegetarianism on people by the back door. And frankly, Germany has a huge tradition of sausage making. They make wonderful things over there, and Merkel has just lost their votes. This Agenda 21/30 is already falling apart. That's why they renamed it. It was supposed to all be on track for 2021, and now they've pushed it back 9 years. And they're still not going to get it. Because it's just another path toward globalism, a new world order, and that is an incredibly powerful and wealthy elite, and everybody else living as debt slaves. That's what Agenda 30 is all about, bringing back feudalism, bringing back serfdom. Now, Germany's Social Democrats, which is a party challenging Angela Merkel's Christian Democrats, is now ahead in the opinion polls. Not only is Merkel herself in serious trouble in the coming election, she's taking her whole party down with her. We are even hearing that Jean-Claude Juncker is thinking about resigning because he's been trying to put forward his plan for a much more tightly controlled European Union, a federalized European Union, and he's getting pushback from all of the member nations, and he's basically throwing a tantrum and saying, if you don't allow me to create a new federalized Europe, I'm going to quit. Okay, Jean-Claude, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Over in Norway, one of their bishops is trying to start a campaign calling on churches to employ paperless migrants, knowing it will result in fines and imprisonment. Again, Romans 13, Mr. Bishop, got to pay attention. You're supposed to know this stuff. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently over in Canada, a 14-year-old Canadian girl at a high school dance was fondled by a Syrian refugee who was assisted by a second Syrian refugee who kept the girl from escaping, as it were. I'm not going to go into the lurid details, but the girl complained, and apparently the girl was told not to complain, not to file a complaint, to see it from his perspective. And of course the parents got upset and filed a Freedom of Information Act request, which basically revealed the school officials took the side of the Syrian refugee boy. We have countries, Canada and Europe, are starting to tolerate a rape culture in order to be politically correct on the refugee issue. Where are all those feminists from the 1990s who were screaming about holding hands without permission was rape, lock them up? Nigel Farage, the former UKIP leader, is supporting Donald Trump and basically saying, yes, Sweden is in serious, serious chaos, saying the city of Malmo in the south of the country may be the world's rape capital at this point. Now, everybody's out there saying, oh, it's exaggerated, we're not hearing about it, but there are so many videos. People are catching this stuff on YouTube videos. This was an absolute disastrous policy for George Soros and the globalists to follow. Remember what I said before about all of liberalism is based on an intellectual fraud. And that's why liberals keep making so many horrific mistakes. And the bigger the grab for power, the worse the damage is done. And we're seeing it all across Europe. We're seeing it all across America. Apparently, hundreds of fraudulent asylum seekers are defrauding Germany's welfare system. Remember what I said about the welfare system in Europe is already strained to the breaking point. And apparently, 154 asylum seekers in the city of Braunschweig were found to have claimed welfare benefits by fraudulent means. Sputnik News launched their own investigation. And as one example of what's going on, a 25-year-old Sudanese immigrant in Braunschweig had defrauded the German welfare system by using 7 different manufactured identities to claim more than $23,000 in welfare payments in different German cities. Apparently, Denmark just realized they're making social benefit payments to refugees who are no longer in Denmark. In fact, they're down fighting with Daesh in Syria. And Denmark is sending them money. Completely out of control here. Now then, the Department of Homeland Security has abandoned all of the Obama policies and is ordering their agents to start to expand deportations and basically go on out and do their jobs. Trump is getting ready to issue a new revised immigration order. This one is a little more carefully crafted. Dual citizens will be exempt, and the new deportations are going to focus on those with demonstrated criminality, which is still a lot of them, because according to Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, 75% of the people that are targeted for deportation have prior criminal records. Remember what I said, migration is a filtering mechanism. Story coming out of conspiracydiscovery.info called Dear Populists. It's written in the form of a letter to populist movements all over the world and is sounding the reminder that the globalists, the New World Order, people who want a global dictatorship, will stop at nothing to sabotage and destroy democracy and populism. Have you noticed how the globalists now say democracy and populism like they're profanity, they're dirty words? Oh, they're populist, they're democratic. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm going to break the normal order that I do stories in, and I'm going to skip on down to the situation in California and Nevada with the weather and the water system, because it's looking like this is going to be very, very serious. Apparently, the National Weather Service has warned they're expecting an imminent failure of the South Dayton Retention Pond. And this is just east of Carson City, Nevada. And this is a very serious situation. One of the issues that we need to look at regarding Oroville Dam, and by the way, the water level is going up. They'd managed to drop it by about 50 feet. But one of the things they did to get that water level lower is the upstream dams and retention ponds were allowed to fill to their absolute maximum. There's no more room in them. And if one of those were to collapse, that could start a cascade down there. People are not only concerned about Oroville, they're looking at Morgan Hill and Anderson Reservoir as strained to capacity. Over at Lake Berisa, their spillway is overflowing. And as if those poor people did not have enough trouble, norovirus has hit the Oroville Evacuation Center. What a mess. What a mess. Now, the rain is continuing today and tomorrow, but as far as the effect on the watershed, it may take a few days after that for all the water to collect on down to the dam. Now, that soil in the watershed is already saturated. It can't absorb any more. So, I feel so sorry for those people. Now, apparently, the failure at the Oroville Dam has caused concern down in Santa Cruz, where they're having to reassure the public about the 56-year-old Newell Creek Dam, whether it's going to be able to withstand it or not. Apparently, the spillway at the Don Pedro Dam in Stanislaus County has been wide open, trying to prevent the water level from gaining up there. Apparently, there was a levee breach in San Joaquin. We've all seen the photo of one of the roads saturated, just literally swallowed a fire engine. And apparently, there are evacuations going on at Wilton. And here is the problem with that situation, because the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant is in the middle of the imminent flood zone. Now, the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant was decommissioned in 2009, but a lot of the spent reactor fuel rods are still stored there. And we're back in a situation that was of concern during Fukushima. Now, normally, these spent fuel rods, which are generating heat from continued decay, are stored in these cooling ponds. They're in special racks to keep them far away from each other, and they're in a solution of water and I think it's boric acid to try and keep fission from occurring. If there was a flood and the solution washed away, and even worse, the racks were to collapse, then all these fuel rods are going to pile onto each other. You could have a runaway fission situation there as well. And adding insult to injury, as we talk about the decrepit condition of our nation's infrastructure, an analysis of the U.S. Department of Transportation basically came out and said 55,710 U.S. bridges are structurally deficient. They are not able to carry the load they were originally designed to carry. So, it's ugly over there. Let's take a couple of phone calls. Kyle in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Well, just real quick on those other 2 points. If you want to look up how bad our infrastructure is, look up the Pennsylvania Turnpike Bridge. It's a massive bridge that somebody driving on it saw, I think, a 2-foot crack in the middle of the bridge, getting ready to collapse. They had to shut it for weeks. It's still shut. And as for California with the droughts, it's just more proof, or the rain, it's just more proof that the earth moves in cycles. You go from drought to extreme rain, hot to cold. It's all part of the natural process of the earth. The reason why I called in is about Milo and the situation, and I think the way that it ties in with what they're doing with General Flynn. We see how these people, what their attack pattern is, what their plan is. They're going to start isolating individuals, independent media personalities, people who vocally speak out against the left, and they're going to start individually attacking them, finding anything they can, and if there's nothing there, they're going to start making it up. This is the definition of first they came for, and I did nothing.
It's the politics of personal destruction, which is a hallmark of the Clinton campaign machine. And yeah, they're basically even within the White House, they're trying to pick off Trump's lieutenants, starting with Flynn. And earlier we were reporting on a story that says Priebus wants to get rid of Bannon and a couple of others so that he can control the White House, and by controlling the White House, he controls Donald Trump. But you're right. Basically, the attack animals will pick an individual, try and cut them out of the herd, and then bring them down.
We know their plan, so the way you have to counter this plan is, if you see them doing this to somebody, a Milo, a General Flynn, a Mike Rivero, and anybody else, I can't stress how important it is to rally around that person.
I agree.
Everybody has made and said things that they regret or that they wish they hadn't said.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't speak to the person that you are now. It doesn't speak to what you feel, what your thoughts are. Hopefully they're constantly evolving. And if you see one of these people coming under fire, the support that needs to go out for them, it's got to be universal. We need to shut down their efforts of isolation and destruction of independent personalities.
Well, we certainly need to do that. The other thing we need to do is to just give everybody a reason to start ignoring all this nonsense. Because we all know the corporate media and the political machines are just nothing but nonstop liars, and certainly the audience numbers and the polling numbers are showing Americans are getting turned off by all of this. The more the liberal establishment and the corporate media scream all this stuff about Donald Trump and everything, the more people are just saying, I don't want to bother anymore. I have somebody who's always writing me about the stupid things they're saying on The View, and I finally wrote back and I said, why are you even bothering to watch this? All you do is complain about it. And it's a valid point. People are starting to turn these shows off. They're not reading the newspapers anymore because the corporate media has destroyed its own credibility. And so has the political establishment. And all they can think of doing is to level the playing field by destroying Donald Trump's credibility and destroying the independent media's credibility. But all they're doing is dragging the entire system down toward an inevitable collapse.
Yeah, and moreover, you're absolutely right. And B, the people who are still buying into the mainstream media, the corporate media, you're not going to be able to change their mind. Furthermore, we demonstrated with the election of Trump, we don't need to change anyone else's mind. The majority is with us. We are the majority, and if people are not awake to what's going on yet, it's almost time to wash your hands and say you can't be saved. We're going to move on without you. We're going to progress.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Mostly, especially online, because the people who are online still pushing the liberal agenda and Hillary really won, most of those people are paid to be there. And they don't care about facts and reality. They're getting a paycheck to sit there and waste everybody's time arguing about how Hillary should be the president and Donald Trump is terrible. And you're right. Just ignore them. It doesn't even matter if they're paid or not. There are a lot of Americans out there right now who are starting to ask some very important questions because of what they've been seeing over the last couple of years. And the most important thing any of us can be doing is to be there with the answers when they ask these important questions. And the most important thing right now is to basically help the corporate media and the government destroy what remains of their credibility. They're dying anyway. Let's effectively have a hospice and help them to a peaceful demise.
If they're not going to, if somebody's asking those questions, if someone's having the realization that you're speaking about, be there to present them with the facts, the logic, the reason, and you'll be able to determine very, very quickly, okay, I'm getting through this person, this is someone I can have an effect on. If it's somebody who just wants to argue from a place of nonsensical feelings and victimization, and they just want to be someone who is, quote-unquote, oppressed, then there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. Now, if you do meet somebody who's being receptive, be very careful you don't overwhelm them. Because when you're educating somebody to what the reality of this country is, in a very real way, they're suffering an identity crisis because their identity is based on the myths they were fed at a very young age. So you have to tread very, very gently. And as I've said before, the art of being a rabble-rouser is knowing what the rabble is ready to listen to and what they're not ready to listen to, and you never cross that line or you're going to lose them. Anyway, Mark,
we have the facts. We have the facts. We have the reasons. We have everything. You don't need to get upset. You can win with the logic, the facts, and the truth. You don't need violence. You don't need to be upset. You don't need anything other than what you already have.
No, you're absolutely right. Okay, Kyle, we're going to let you go. The phone lines are loading up, and I want to talk to Mark in New York. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. 2 points. One is I went on Google Earth today and looked at the spillway in its dry condition. Seems to have some inconsistencies. There was even one spot where it almost looked like there might have been a dip for maybe a 10, 15, 20-foot length of the runway. Just a lot of inconsistencies on the surface of that spillway.
Well, what it looks like to me that has happened. We know from the foreign press that the spillway, they discovered cracks in it all the way back in 2009, and instead of actually fixing it, they painted the cracks over with a concrete solution and crossed their fingers. But it's very obvious, looking at that damage, that the water was still leaking through, and over time it washed out a void underneath the concrete spillway, and the spillway began to sag into it until it reached the breaking point, and that's when it fell into there. And, of course, now that water is scoured out huge amounts of supporting earth, not just from under the concrete spillway, but the adjacent berm, which is getting dangerously close to the northern support of the dam itself.
Plus, it's causing all kinds of troubles back at the generating station, where they're having to dredge out all the fill that's been pushed back up into there.
Yeah, I mean, all that debris washed into the Feather River and backed up the water coming out of the power plant. The power plant is offline now. It's been flooded, and the spillways through the power plant itself, which could have been used to help drain off some of the water, they're now for the most part blocked. And so it's just gone from bad to worse there. And it really is a case where we're just going to have to wait and see and hope for the best, which is okay for ordinary people to do, but we don't really want to be living under a government that just hopes for the best rather than actually planning for these worst-case situations. Because these dams were built at a time when they knew there were going to be occasional monster floods, but they've been neglected. And now we're paying the price for these decisions to not spend money on our national infrastructure as opposed to giving it to Wall Street and refugees and immigrants and various other politically correct endeavors. And it's really allowed the core structure of our country to decline. And when we talk about the decline of our infrastructure, we're not just talking about things that we require in an emergency like dams and so forth, but even our interstate highway system is in serious decline. FedEx has estimated that because of all the holes and cracks in the roadways, they're going through tires twice as fast as they did back when the roads were under good repair. Somebody was actually posting a video taken from the cab of a long-haul tractor-trailer delivery truck, and you could just hear the truck shaking. You could see in the video just huge holes and gaps in the road surface. They're having to drive slower. That's driving prices up. Here in Hawaii, somebody actually did a study and concluded that the poor condition of our roads, and according to the U.S. Department of Transportation, we have the worst roads of any state in the union, and it's estimated that the average Hawaii driver is spending $700 a year to repair the damage caused by having to drive on these very wrecked roads, and it's only been made worse by the construction of the light rail. In a lot of areas in the United States, roads whose paving has deteriorated, they're not repaving them. They're letting the roads go back to being gravel roads. That, of course, is obviously going to slow traffic down on those roads even more. Our infrastructure is not only incapable of assisting us during these crises like the rain in California, but it's inadequate to support a realistic degree of commerce to keep our economy working.
I hear you on that.
Okay.
The other point I wanted to make was the Rancho Seco nuclear power plant, just southeast of Elk Grove, south of Sacramento.
Yes.
I got nervous because there was a YouTuber out there said there was a nuke plant there, and they're already having evacuations in that region, Willows, I believe, and Harold. The plant was decommissioned in '89, and approximately 22 million metric tons spent nuclear uranium fuel supposedly on site in dry cask storage, presumably underground. I don't believe there are any fuel pools there. I know the.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
I was able to view that site, and it does look quite. Even Wikipedia said there was a hole in the containment building big enough to drive a truck through. Apparently, everything in the containment building had been removed as well. So anything that's there is more than likely in dry cask cement storage underground on the facility.
Well, let's hope that the dry casks are still intact and haven't been cracked through years of neglect. Anyway, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to grab another phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha, young'un.
Aloha.
Hey, I had to agree with the one gal you had on earlier about the flipping of houses and so forth, which tends to be cause a nightmare depending on what's going on with a couple of factors. One, where the house is located, not to mention how much ground or land accompanies that house to start with as far as acreage goes, or lack thereof. As far as which can really have a bearing depending on where you're at. On the other side of the edge of that sword is the aspect of the mortgage insurance and how that comes into play. But then again, I think one culprit that has a lot to do with those issues is the aspect of who is conducting the appraisal of such, and whether or not the appraiser is actually viewing the house, or just simply taking the word of mouth of whoever is trying to get ready to sell it for a certain price point. So that really has a fiasco with the market, which caused that housing issue that we had a number of years back. And so now people are not very trusting as far as the people that are doing a refinancing on their house, their home, the property, and so forth at nauseam because of what happened. They're having to go through so many hoops, it's absurd.
It really is, and again, that issue of the appraisers being compromised and influenced, that was certainly a big part of what was going on during the SNL meltdown. Again, it was all part of this get-rich-quick scheme by these inside operatives.
Yeah, and the bad part is that the question is, where were the watchdogs that were supposed to be watching the hen house and making sure no wolves got in there?
Well, as we've learned by watching the SEC during Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. The watchdogs aren't really doing much watching. More and more, we're seeing these government agencies that we're told are supposed to be protecting us see themselves as actually there to assist the corporations they're supposed to maintain oversight over. Again, I go back to the Minerals Management Service, which ignored the fact that the manual blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon was 4 years overdue for mandatory maintenance. And too many of these agencies are wooed by the corporations and literally seduced into thinking you're actually here to help our business along. Certainly we're seeing that with the FDA in terms of this vaccine issue, where these watchdog agencies are out there saying, oh, it's okay, it's really okay, just buy your vaccines and get your kids shot up.
Well, that's because, Michael, they're paid to turn and look the other way as far as the housing situation goes.
Yeah, that really is it. And again, that is a symptom, classic symptom of an economic fascist dictatorship where corporate greed and governmental authority are aligned together against the general population. Thank you for the phone call, Francis. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And before I take a phone call, I'm getting a lot of emails about the situation regarding Milo. And I have to say that I join those who were very upset with his comments about pedophilia, and I have a very strong opinion on that subject, as you've already known, and I'm afraid that I agree with those who think this video of him condoning sexual relations between men and boys does put him in a very, very poor light, and he was right to step down from Breitbart News. So, I mean, that's where we are on that. Let's take a phone call here. Richard in Washington State. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, Mike, I'm in regards to the media.
Yes.
We just passed a centennial moment here. In the U.S. Congressional Record of February 9th, 1917, Congressman Callaway announced that J.P. Morgan Interests bought 25 of America's leading newspapers and inserted their own editors in order to control the media.
Mm-hmm.
They've had 100 years to refine their art. And it says here, U.S. Congressman Oscar Callaway informs Congress that J.P. Morgan is a Rothschild front and has taken control of the media industry in America. He was a congressman from Texas,
mm-hmm.
and he was a member of the Defense Appropriations Committee. And he made a short statement. It says, in March 1915, the J.P. Morgan Interests, Steel Shipbuilding, and Powder Interests, and their subsidiary organizations got together with 12 men high up in the newspaper world and selected the most influential newspapers in the United States and a sufficient number of them to control the general policy and daily press of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
The 12 men worked the problems out by selecting 179 newspapers and then began by an elimination process to retain only those necessary for the purpose of controlling the general policy of the daily press throughout the country. They found it only necessary to purchase and control 25 of the greatest newspapers. The 25 papers were agreed upon. Emissaries were sent to purchase the policy. The national and international of these papers, the agreement was reached. The policy in the papers was bought to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper,
mm-hmm.
properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of the preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers.
Well, I mean, there's no question the rich and powerful have always tried to commandeer the media. So does government itself with things like Operation Mockingbird. There were at one point laws passed to limit media ownership. But unfortunately, those laws have now been discarded to the point where all corporate media now is basically in the possession of just 6 corporate leaders who have, again, other interests in other areas, and they use those newspapers to serve those interests. But with the American people waking up to that reality, that influence is now clearly on the wane. People are looking at the news and saying, we know they're lying to us. And America's corporate media is now finding itself in the same position that Pravda and Izvestia did in the closing years of the Soviet Union, where everybody reading them knew it was all a big, huge lie. They were only reading the newspapers to find out what is the government lying to us about today.
Well, this happened in March.
Yes.
And the Lusitania was sunk in May 7th.
Yes.
So they had a little time to prepare the media for their, what did that, the sentence says, they have resorted to anything necessary to commercialize public sentiment and sandbag the National Congress into making extravagant and wasteful appropriations for the Army, Navy under false pretense that it was necessary. Their stock argument is that it is patriotism. They are playing with every prejudice and passion of the American people. This is a Congressman Oscar Callaway from Texas in 1917 in February.
Yes.
So these people have refined their art.
Well, they certainly have as the new technologies come along. We had a story a few years ago about how U.S. military intelligence professional propagandists were actually working in CNN's newsroom. But again, we all know that's what's going on now. A controlled media as a propaganda device works best when the general public doesn't know they're being propagandized. And now, not only is the public aware of that, the public is also aware that the government has actually legalized the use of propaganda on the American people. The government is admitting they're lying to us and hoping that out of some kind of distorted sense of patriotism, we will agree to believe whatever the lies tell us to believe. That's simply not going to work. That's another failed prognostication on that liberal agenda that you can get people, you can control people's thoughts and beliefs by controlling the environment, and it doesn't work. Okay?
Yeah, well, Reuters is owned by the Rothschilds also.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
But they're losing they're losing their grip. We're in a period of tremendous transition, as dramatic as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing. And the corporate media is literally fighting for its survival. It's lost control of the minds of most of America right now. That's why they're having to lie about their readership and the number of clicks at their websites. And that's why they've gone on the attack on the independent media. Because they're very frustrated. They'll come out with a lie about, Putin did this and Putin did that, and having it all exposed by us. I mean, I just put up a story here where apparently after all this screaming about Russia is controlling Donald Trump and the rest of it, apparently over at InfoWars, they have a story on concrete evidence showing that Putin was actually paying Hillary Clinton and John Podesta. And again, the corporate media doesn't want you to know that, but you're going to know it because the corporate media does not have a monopoly on information flow in this country any longer. Okay?
Well, I think what the Russians are actually our natural friends because the French were on the southern border and the English had troops in Canada during the Civil War. And the Tsar sent his warships to our ports to help defend us in case of a pinch.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't teach that in school when they teach the history of the Civil War. That Russia intervened to prevent Europe from invading the United States on behalf of the Confederacy. And as far as being natural friends here, ordinary people the world over are going to be friends. The divisions, the violence, the exhortations to war and invasion and jihad or whatever are coming from a very tiny segment of the population who, in my opinion, are seriously mentally ill. And we need a system that prevents these kind of people from ever achieving positions of power and authority ever again, whether it's in commerce or politics or, for that matter, religion. We need sane people in charge of the world, and we don't have that right now. Anyway, Richard, we're going to let you go here. We're going to let you go and get back to doing some news. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, as you know, there's a big deal going on over Trump's upcoming visit to Great Britain, and somebody ginned together a petition and said, oh, we don't want him, he's terrible, he's evil. And there's even going to be a debate in Parliament about it. But the reality is it would be a terrible diplomatic faux pas for Britain to cancel Donald Trump's state visit. And basically, it would divide the West. Sir Simon Burns said a ban would isolate the UK and make it less influential. And yeah, that may be the whole point. Because George Soros is probably very much afraid of what two anti-globalist powers teamed up together might be able to do to stop this rush toward the New World Order. Right now, a United States and an independent Great Britain working together against the globalists is a force to be reckoned with. And I would suspect that George Soros' hand is behind this attempt to create a diplomatic rift between Great Britain and the United States for just that reason. Now, apparently one of Soros's organizations is calling on the corporate media to ethnically cleanse their journalistic vocabulary. And apparently Soros is calling on journalists to stop using phrases like illegal immigrant that might portray migrants in a negative light, and basically saying it's racist to call them illegal immigrants. George, illegal isn't a race. And we see through your machinations here. We're going to grab a phone call. Richard in Chicago. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on this story you mentioned yesterday about Russia trying to blackmail Trump with this alleged sex, documented videotaped scandal. I think it clearly, I'd say, is more about bashing Russia once again than anything to do with Trump. I did want to clarify one thing. It turns out it wasn't Robert David Steele.
It was Christopher Steele. I know. I misspoke. I got a lot of people who corrected me on that. It was Christopher Steele. But again, Soros would be very much interested in driving a wedge between Donald Trump and Russia, because Russia is another roadblock to his globalist New World Order. And so the last thing Soros wants to see happen is for the United States and Great Britain and Russia and China to all become buddy-buddy, because then his dream of a New World Order, one world government is certainly beyond his reach within whatever remains of his lifetime.
Yes, the story seems to be, just the U.S. CIA, FBI, and also in Great Britain, the MI6 trying to bash Russia. I mean, like you say, the whole threat to globalism. Russia is clearly a threat to that, and Iran, unfortunately, we could ultimately still see as an alternative. I think they want to bash Russia as much as possible, and if that doesn't work out, the alternative, try to drive a wedge between Russia and Iran. I don't know. I mean, Trump did at least get rid of the participation in the TPP, right? But
well, they're trying to bring they're trying to bring back the TPP under another name here, and again, the existing political establishment is very much at war with Donald Trump. They don't want him changing things. They've worked a very long time to get the human race under their control, to profit from them, to control them. And again, if you listen to any of these people promoting the New World Order, the way they say populist and democratic, it's like it's a dirty word. Like they read about it, scrawled on a restroom wall someplace.
A lot of the Israel firsters are very on board with this immigration. Of course, Israel doesn't take part in it themselves.
Yeah, that's true. Israel's really great about saying Europe should take the refugees and the U.S. should take the. They won't take any. In fact, they're trying to get rid of some of their groups, like the Ethiopian Jews. They're trying to find a way to expel them. And of course, for Israel's long-term plan of Eretz Israel, if all the Muslims living in all those countries around Israel have left for Europe and the United States, it's going to be much easier for Israel to project power into those areas.
I know, you always mention the project for the New American Century, where Wesley Clark laid out 7 countries, with Iran being the last one. So it seems like, the Israel lobbyists will keep trying to ramp up this war with Iran, which will have Russia backing them, though, right? I mean, they can't really believe they'll drive a wedge between those two countries. I mean, what do you see in the future regarding Iran and tensions with the U.S.?
Well, again, we're seeing a ramp up, screaming, calling for war by the war hawks for war on Iran. We were talking earlier in the show about how they're trying to get a bill into Congress for an authorization for the use of force against Iran, just because we don't like them. And Iran hasn't done anything at all. They're not even claiming Iran has weapons of mass destruction. What they're trying to sell you is this idea that the United States has a right to go on in and invade and conquer Iran because somewhere down the road Iran might decide to make weapons of mass destruction. You could apply that criteria to every planet on Earth. We're going to have to invade Greenland because somewhere in the future they may make a nuclear bomb. And it's utterly ridiculous. And, of course, it's got nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction and everything to do with controlling what currency all of the world's natural resources are sold in. And that is really what all of these wars are all about.
Thank you for taking my call, Michael. Have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, over at the Ron Paul Liberty Report, they had a very interesting article, and it was saying, how about we call it quits? No more forcing 320 million people into a single mold. And this is a roundabout way of calling for the end of empires. And they're talking about the same thing that I've been talking about, that humanity is probably best served by a planet with 1,000 little tiny nations of all about the same size, taking care of their own people, trading across the borders, tourism across the borders, but nobody of a size large enough to be causing problems around the rest of the world. And this article is pointing out, is there any advantage to the people of the United States of America to be under a single government in Washington, D.C.? Certainly that's not the way the country was set up, because when the United States, emphasis on the plural, was created, the power and authority was with the state governments, because the state governments were within the states and knew what the states' problems were. The exception being Jerry Brown out there in California at the moment. So basically the Ron Paul Liberty Report is saying, let's take groups of like-minded people and let them go their own separate way. And I'm absolutely in agreement with that. Now then, as you know, we were reporting on this strange release of radioactive iodine that was detected. Apparently, they're saying back in January, but it's only being made public now. And already they're trying to point the finger of blame at Russia. Oh, Russia has detonated a test nuclear bomb in violation of the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And this came out of Red Flag News. Now, the reality is anybody can sail a ship or fly a plane into the Arctic if that is indeed where this event happened. Nations conducting illegal nuclear tests often conduct them far from home. The Vela incident happened near Bouvet Island in the South Atlantic, and that is thought to have been a joint Israeli-South African nuclear test. So it's premature to lay the blame on Russia For all we know, it could be Al Gore trying to melt the Arctic ice to boost ticket sales for his latest mockumentary, An Inconvenient Truth 2. But looking at the radioactive maps, we're not really sure that it's coming from the Arctic. The highest readings are from Poland, not Norway. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog saying that we can't discount this being contamination from that explosion in the French nuclear plant not too long ago. I have a different theory, and when we come back from these words from our sponsors, I will share that with you, what I think is a possibility that should be looked at. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're talking about this mysterious spike in radiation that was monitored all over Europe, was first detected by Norway, publicly announced by France, and everybody's already saying, oh, well, Russia's testing nuclear weapons up above the Arctic Circle. And it's just a continuance of that policy. Anything bad happens, it's Russia's fault. It has to be Russia's fault. All the bad things are Russia's fault. And as Investment Watch blog pointed out, there was that fire at the French nuclear power station. And looking at the map of radiation levels across Europe, the highest reading is in Poland. And it tapers off both to the south and up toward the Arctic Circle. So it opens up another possibility. And I'm not saying this is what happened, but it's worth considering. And that has to do with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in central Ukraine. And it's one of the largest nuclear power stations. It has 6 pressurized light water nuclear reactors. It's still under construction. They're going to be adding more reactors to it until 2030. And, of course, as you know, Ukraine does have a past history of mistakes with reactors. And so before we rush off and just assume that Russia's testing nuclear warheads, and especially in light of Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, Hanford, we might want to be making sure that we're not having another possible problem with the nuclear power station. And obviously the corporate media, in addition to wanting to demonize Russia for a nuclear test, they want to protect the nuclear power industry because they're really good advertisers. Remember after Fukushima happened, oh, it's no big deal, a little radiation's good for you. You guys are just making such a huge stink about this, and it just, you're making a big deal out of this. Corporate media protects corporate interests, and nuclear power is a big bucks endeavor. So I think it's premature to just assume that this is all about Russia. Now, a new study has come on out confirming radioactive iodine from Fukushima is found in kelp off the coast of California, confirming that radiation from Fukushima did reach the state's urban coastline, which is no big surprise considering how long ago it actually happened. But they're not going to be able to clean up that mess. Now, here's a story coming out of John Rappaport. Apparently, new vaccines are going to be designed to permanently alter human DNA. The promise is that they're going to go on in and change your DNA so that you can't get sick any longer. And this, of course, is very scary, especially in light of this continuing push to mandate and enforce vaccinations all over the world. We know what's best for you. We're going to stick a needle in you. Even when we make a mistake, it's still a good thing. Remember the swine flu vaccinations of 1976? The vaccine killed 50 times as many people as the flu. So now they're talking about using vaccines to alter the DNA of human beings. Now, what else might that be used for besides ostensibly protecting us from various illnesses? Well, they could change our behavior because, again, contrary to the liberal political philosophy, much of our psychological makeup is inherited genetically from our parents. They could have a vaccine that makes you more aggressive, makes you less aggressive, They could have a vaccine. They're already talking about drugs to basically kill the religious instinct, which may not entirely be negative. But they're literally playing God here. And they're tinkering with the very code, not just of life itself, but our life. And considering how recklessly their products are being marketed and deployed and protected even though they're causing harm, this is a very, very alarming development. This idea of vaccines designed to alter your DNA permanently. Especially in a world where you are not given a choice whether you want this or not. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Going to talk a little bit about computers. Apparently over in the European Union, their top privacy body has been studying Windows 10, and they are very unhappy with what they are seeing, even after Microsoft agreed to tweak the settings to make the EU version of Windows 10 less intrusive and surveillant than the version that you are using on your computers, if you're unlucky. And this has always been an issue with all of this software. It's being backdoored, it's being intrusive. The attitude of the computer companies, the software companies, and the government itself is that they own you and all of your property and that they can just do whatever they want with you, to heck with the Bill of Rights. And apparently the EU Working Party is saying that the consent screen is not being 100% honest with what data is being collected by Microsoft. And that needs to be clarified. Now, as we move toward Windows as a service, a lot of enterprise IT managers are having to deal with a very unpleasant reality. Because up until recently, when you bought a perpetual license for an operating system, you would install it, you'd get it tuned up and tweaked, and that would be the end of it. You'd actually do some productive work. But because of Windows as a service, it's basically going to be increasing their workload, because they're going to be constantly having to deal with issues related to the fact that Windows is being a service. Everybody's going to be dependent on Microsoft servers being available when it comes time to authorize your computer's session. And forget about the idea of having a standalone computer not connected to the net anymore. If you go for too long without Windows phoning home, it'll simply stop working. And something I said the other day must be kept in mind. The more you centralize something, the more of a target it becomes for the enemies of the nation. If everybody's house has solar panels, then the city can't be blacked out. If everybody is plugged into a single power station, bombing that power station blacks out the entire city. If everybody's collecting rainwater or they have wells on their property, it's very hard to control the city through forced thirst. But if everybody is mandated to get their water from a water treatment plant, then anybody taking control of that plant has control of the people. Or even worse, could poison them. Same thing with food. If you have gardens at your home, you can't be starved into submission. If you are dependent on the corporate supply chain and somebody disrupts that chain, you are in trouble. And the same thing is true of computers. If your software is not able to operate on its own and requires permission from a remote server, whoever has control of that remote server has control of your machine. And there was an ugly incident a while back where there was a company that had sold a whole bunch of software that had to log into their licensing servers for you to use your software. And the company went out of business, and the licensing servers were shut down, and everybody who had that software, all of a sudden it quit working. It is very alarming that there seems to be so little thought put in to actually guaranteeing the end users usability and access, whether it's computers, water, food, whatever. It's always about maintaining that monopolistic control. And it increases the risk of the whole country, the more tightly concentrated essential infrastructure, essential utilities are collected together. Now, interesting little story. Verizon just bought Yahoo, and they got it at a discount, $350 million less than the initial offer, because apparently Yahoo's company's value was driven down by these widely reported successful cyber attacks, which raises an interesting possibility. Were these cyber attacks a form of corporate sabotage specifically to drive Yahoo's purchase price down? And where was the NSA when Yahoo was being subjected to all these attacks? Same place the NSA always is, nowhere to be found. Hiding out in their data centers, amusing themselves with naked pictures of your boyfriends and girlfriends. Now, cyber crooks have once again began slinging malware that subverts elements of the legitimate TeamViewer remote control app. And apparently there was a 4-year pause where they weren't exploiting this, but now they're coming on back. And basically it begins with a booby-trapped email harboring malicious attachments that pose as eFax messages. And if you run that, the malicious code uses DLL hijacking to create a backdoor on your compromised machines. It's like open season on computer users. And apparently nobody in the government thinks this is a problem, even when you have ransomware literally placing people's lives at risk when hospitals get hacked. Businesses are now starting to stockpile Bitcoin just to have it on hand if they have to pay the ransom. That's how out of control the situation is. Is the NSA totally incompetent? Or are they complicit? Or are they both? Is cybercrime and ransomware, like civil forfeiture, just another mechanism by which a desperately broke and hopelessly in debt government loots and plunders the American people? Now, Google, of course, has been hit with multiple scandals where their ad metrics seem to have these little kind of mistakes that always favor Google. And Google, in order to get out of this mess, apparently is now allowing a third party to audit their ad metrics to reassure their advertisers they're not being cheated. It's amazing here. Story coming out of the BBC. Thousands of spills at U.S. oil and gas fracking sites. Interesting the BBC is reporting this and not the American corporate media. But apparently, according to the latest research, 16%, that's 16%, of hydraulically fractured oil and gas wells are spilling liquids and gas every single year. And they've discovered there have been 6,600 releases from these fracking wells over a 10-year period in just 4 states. The biggest problems were reported in oil-rich North Dakota, where 67% of the spills were recorded. And then you wonder why the Dakota Access Pipeline was being so strenuously objected to. The largest spill recorded in this study involved 100,000 liters of fluid, most related to storing and moving liquids. Now, it isn't just the petroleum, which is carcinogenic, by the way, but the methane leaks are a serious problem. We've all seen the videos of people's homes that have been rendered virtually worthless because if you turn on the tap to get some water, you can hold a cigarette lighter to it and flames come out. But as that methane percolates to the surface, along with who knows what all else from the fracking fluid, and it gets into lakes and ponds and streams, it destroys the oxygen in the water and it kills the fish. And we've seen all these articles about massive fish die off in this lake or that pond, and they'll always say it was oxygen depletion, and then they stop. They don't tell you what it is that is depleting the oxygen. It is that methane. because as the methane comes bubbling up through the water, it will combine with the oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, which bubbles up into the atmosphere to annoy Al Gore, and more water molecules. That's what's killing the fish. Now, interesting little story. This came out of The Guardian, and they're talking about how scientists leading a de-extinction effort are saying that this team at Harvard University could create a resurrected mammoth in just 2 more years, funding willing. Now, they're admitting that this is going to be a hybrid mammoth elephant. In other words, an elephant with mammoth DNA in it, which means the scientific value of this is pretty much nil. I mean, maybe they're thinking about making these things to sell to zoos or anything. But there is a problem with this idea of resurrecting extinct animals. And with all due apologies to Michael Crichton, his Jurassic Park method of bringing back the dinosaurs was flawed. Because it takes more than just the DNA to create a new life. There's also the endless series of hormones provided by the mother's body, which significantly affect development. Now, that issue was actually addressed in a later film in the Jurassic Park franchise. But what filled Jurassic Park were artificial creations that only looked like dinosaurs. If one were to create an absolutely accurate Jurassic Park dinosaur today, it would have a hard time even surviving. Despite the name Jurassic Park, the specific dinosaurs in the movies were from the Cretaceous period. Earth's atmosphere was very different back then. Samples trapped in amber show 50% more oxygen, allowing for higher metabolic rates to support those large sizes. And there is evidence that Earth's atmosphere was much thicker and denser during the whole Mesozoic era. Dense enough that it actually provided a small amount of buoyancy to land animals, which allowed them to grow to such large size. So, a totally accurate Cretaceous dinosaur brought to life today would be gasping to breathe, be too heavy for its legs, and probably find the present-day sunshine just a bit too bright for comfort. Whatever they come up with out of this Harvard experiment, it may be a very hairy elephant with large tusks. It's not really going to be a mammoth. It'll be an oddity at best. Now, interestingly enough, there's an article that came on out from the Express where they're saying organic material has been discovered on Ceres, that dwarf planet between Mars and Jupiter, boosting the hopes of finding life outside of Earth. And they're talking about these organic molecules discovered by NASA's Dawn spacecraft. And they don't actually have a complete breakdown of them, but they say the materials resemble tar-like materials such as carite or asphalite. And they're saying the discovery indicates that the starting material in the solar system contained these essential elements or building blocks for life. Now, this has actually been known for quite a while, because way back, same year I was born, 1952, there was an experiment done called the Miller-Urey experiment by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey, in which they simply took a giant flask and they filled it with the gases presumed to be the primordial atmosphere of Earth, methane, hydrogen, water vapor, and so forth, and they subjected it to electrical sparking, which would be simulating lightning. And after a while, the interior surface of this flask was covered with this sticky brown material, which was analyzed and found to consist of the basic amino acid building blocks of life on Earth. So the implication here is that any planet that has these basic gases and a source of energy is going to be producing amino acids. And as the amino acids mix and match in whatever fluid medium is available, sooner or later, it's going to create a self-replicating molecule, and once you have that, you do have life. A little bit of good news for us old-style, old-school astronomers. There is a big push by NASA planetary scientists to redefine what consists of a planet. and bring Pluto back to being a planet again. And apparently Alan Stern, the lead scientist on the New Horizon mission, is basically saying the current definition of a planet used by the IAU is overly complex. And basically points out Pluto has an atmosphere thicker than that of Mercury. It's got water ice mountains bigger than the Rocky Mountains, ridges on frozen plains that show geological activity. And you have to say, yeah, it may be small. It's a planet. I agree. It's a planet. Now then, we started this story yesterday. We're going to get back to it. Obviously, over the years of Martian exploration, we have seen indications of flowing water on the surface of Mars. There appears to be remnants of extremely brackish or briny liquid water still on the surface, but at one time, Mars appeared to have an ocean. And they're saying, where did it go? And the prevailing theory was that the Martian atmosphere in ancient times consisted primarily of carbon dioxide, which is very heavy, like the atmosphere on Venus, and this weighty atmosphere allowed Mars to retain its water. So they wanted to confirm it by having the Curiosity rover looking for carbonate materials, which would support the greenhouse warming theory, and they didn't find it. The data has come on back saying, no, there wasn't a lot of carbon dioxide in Mars' past to explain it. Now, I have a theory, and that is if you look at a topographical map of Mars, on one side of the planet, there is an obvious circular feature called Hellas Planitia, and at nearly the opposite point on Mars is an area of uplift, the Tarsus region, which is home to some of the largest volcanoes in the solar system. It looks to me like Mars suffered a huge impact event at some time in the past, powerful enough to literally push the crust away from Hellas Planitia and buckle it up underneath Tarsus. An impact on that scale would splash much of the Martian atmosphere into space, leaving Mars nearly airless, which in turn would cause the water to undergo vacuum evaporation and slowly leak into space. And again, looking at the topographic map, it does look like there's a large area that would have been an ideal ocean. So things can change a lot. And sometimes just looking at the maps can give you a clue to what's really going on out there. Alrighty, we're coming up on our last commercial break of the show today. When we come on back, India has set a new record in space exploration. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. And we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, last segment of our program today. And we're going to take one last phone call from Brandon in San Francisco. Brandon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Real quick, I guess Rolling Stone released a hit piece on InfoWars, and I wanted to ask you, as a form of protest, do you think the legality of removing or hiding the Rolling Stone magazine on the news rack, do you think that's a form of protest that doesn't cross any legal?
Well, that's going to depend on the owner of the news rack, because until you buy the magazine and pay for it, it's his property.
Right. Now, at like Safeway, for example, but I see what you're saying. So, did you cover the whole Milo thing, his resignation from Breitbart today?
Yeah, I did mention it, and again. The comments he made in that videotape about pedophilia, I'm obviously very troubled by that.
Right. Well, listen, thanks for taking the late call, and you guys have a safe evening.
Thank you. I will certainly try and do that. We got a lot of rain coming on down here, and we'll have a nice evening. Anyway, thank you very much. We're going to close the phone lines and covering the rest of the time until the end of the show here. As I mentioned before the commercial break, India has launched 104 satellites from a single rocket. And apparently the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle carried a single 714-kilogram main satellite and 103 smaller nanosatellites. And these other nanosatellites from other countries, including Israel, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, Switzerland, the United Arab Emirates. 96 came from the United States. Now, it sounds good. The smaller you make a spacecraft, the less weight, the less cost getting it into orbit. But tracking all of these is getting to be a problem. And we have to deal with the reality that at some point, somebody's got to clean out some of the garbage that's up there, or it's going to become a very, very dangerous place to orbit in. Japan was trying to create a system. Apparently their first test has failed. I have my own idea on how we can do some of this. But it is an issue. Now, new satellites by treaty have to have the ability to deorbit themselves. I don't know if that applies to the nanosatellites. Because given that there were 103 of them in this rocket, they can't be very, very large at all, which means they can't be carrying much in the way of fuel or a rocket engine, if indeed they are. So I'd like to look into that a little bit more. Donald Trump is apparently dropping hints at NASA that he may want to send humans back to the moon. And again, I am fully on board with revitalizing our space program, not because it's space and not because we need to see our flag on other worlds, but because we need a civilian technology incubator to jumpstart our manufacturing and industry yet again. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Got to do the Jim Goddard show up there in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow at Republic Broadcasting. Until then, aloha, America.